March when this all kicked off, my first instinct was, I won't say exactly the words I used, but I thought, oh dear, I'm going to lose my job. And that very quickly looked like a reality. And hey Barry, you are right, how's it going? It was only after I'd kind of gotten over the fear of losing my job that I started to look at things a little bit more critically. And in 2021, my family and I decided to leave Ireland and move to Poland. And when I was in Poland, I no longer really trusted the usual sources where I would get information about my country. So like, for example, when I lived in Italy 20 years ago, I'd look at the Irish Times website or whatever to try to find out what was happening. I didn't really feel like I could do that as much anymore. And before I'd left, my father had suggested I watch these YouTube videos, some fella in his car talking to a camera. I said, what? And I watched them. And I watched them with an open mind, and I watched them because my father recommended them to me. And obviously I put a lot of faith in my father's recommendations. And what I found is somebody who, I find like, over the last 3 years, my idea of what makes somebody a good person, somebody that I should listen to, has changed. You know, previously I might have thought somebody who's funny, somebody who's, you know, intelligent, somebody who's got a critical perspective. And it's changed now. The number one quality that I judge people by is bravery. And I think, is this person brave? Is this person prepared to stand behind what they say? Yeah, I might disagree with them, but are they brave enough to say it and to stand up for it? And in 2020, at my father's book launch, we were very lucky to have, I think, one of the bravest people in Ireland at that time to speak, Mr. John Waters, who's here today. And we're very happy that he came and he spoke, and my God, it was amazing. And that video is also available on my father's YouTube channel if you want to watch it. It's terrific. So, in 2021, my father very kindly drove my wife and my son and myself to the airport. And we were stopped by the police. I said, where are you going? And I said very enthusiastically, we're leaving, we're going to have twin babies. And the police said, oh, that's lovely. And then we got on the plane and we went over to live in Poland. And during that time, I watched Thomas's videos religiously. The title of my father's book, the subtitle I should say, is Despatches from the World of Lies. And in many cases, Thomas's videos were dispatches from my home country, where I could find out what was going on back home. And I think one of the greatest things Thomas did was making a video imploring everybody in Ireland to fall in love with this country. And it was profoundly moving. And Mr. Thomas Sheridan is many things. If you've seen some of his talks, you've heard people introduce him as a filmmaker, as a historian, or a writer. They always mention that you're a pagan, Thomas, and that informs a lot of what Thomas talks about. But I suppose I feel he's one of the bravest people to speak here in Ireland, and we're very lucky to have him, and I look forward very much to hearing what he has to say today.
Well, thanks very much, Stephen. I'm very humbled by that. Thank you, Jim, for asking me and your lovely family and everybody who's come along to this. I see there's children here, so that's 90% of my speech, Tom. Thanks. So I'll have to improvise. I've met Jim twice, both at events organised by Jerry here. One was in Tuam in County Galway and one was in Fermoyne. And I met the man briefly, and you said you're writing a book and you asked me to, would I not be interested in it? And I don't normally like books like this, and I'll tell you why. I get biographies up in Sligo for some reason. As soon as they find out who I am, there's some guy who comes out of the woodwork and he goes, I wrote a book about my life, would you read it and tell me what you think of it? And it's usually just the dry shite love of his own mediocrity. It's awful, you know. So I didn't expect that of you, but that was my previous thing. So I read the book, and I absolutely loved it. It's absolutely brilliant. I read it twice. You can see I've taken tons of footnotes from it. Now, it's a book of two halves, appropriately, because it talks about two Irelands, really. And the first part, okay, that was before my coming of age was in the 80s. And I grew up in the Damian flats up the road. Jim was the bank teller, at the Bank of Ireland, where I had an account. And I found my passbook last week. I dug it out. I'm very diligent about my finances. Being a Wall Street person, I learned that you have to have good stewardship over your accounts. And even then I wasn't. And I looked at the passbook, and the last entry was 1983. And I took all the money out, and it was £800 in it. Now, I was adding that up. That was a lot of money back then for someone who was a teenager. Yeah. Now, I was working in pubs, mopping floors, and I used to work in the stock room, taking barrels off the trucks and putting them in the elevator to bring them up. But still, it made me realise, in reading a passage in the book, that the Irish Times said that the 1960s was a bleak and dark time in Ireland. And Jim said in the book, I have absolutely no memory of that. And if you look at TV footage of Ireland in the 60s, a place like O'Connell Street, all around the country, everyone seems really happy and joyous, and there's lots of neon light and bands and just rock and roll and everything else, you know. O'Connell Street is unrecognisable. It looks like Times Square back then. And so it's the same thing, that the 80s weren't bleak. Okay, I didn't drink when I was a teenager or growing up, so I was able to save the money up, but still I spent money on other things, and that, I thought about it, I wasn't broke. I was not living in, we talk about the 80s, everyone was really poor, really broke, no one had a pot to piss in or anything, but I was able to save £800. Which shows you it wasn't as bad as the kind of the revisionism we're given about the times in Ireland. And that jumped off the page when I read that. Things were not as bad. And you go and you look at all ads in newspapers, you see the price of houses, down payment of €1,000 for a house in Drumcondra or something, or Whitehall, or where are all million euro houses now. And you realise that they lie about everything. Even if you see things like RT's reeling in the years, you'll have like something about the swinging 60s, and they'll show like, the Beatles on Philadelphia on Abbey Street, and they'll show things like that. Rolling Stones, Irish tour, it looks fantastic. And then they will interject something horrible. Always do this. Watch that show from now on. It brings you up, Ireland's great. Oh, I've been saying Ireland back then. And then something in Northern Ireland, some murders, something else that's amplified to an extreme to make you think that that was just as part of relevant of the culture back then as everyone else's life. And the Irish media functions in that way. They're always putting a damper and on our experience as Irish people. Like I can remember when I lived in America, and I can remember I worked on Wall Street. And people used to see Irish films, and a lot of them were really bad, dark, like Cal and films like that. And I said, no, my life growing up in Ireland wasn't like that at all. I guess I don't exist in certain parts, but that's not typical. And they were the only films you'd ever see come out of Ireland. I think when The Commitments came along, it was the first one that showed a really kind of Ireland that I grew up in. But even that showed like a kind of, obviously Roddy Doyle was going for that kind of Ken Loach sort of social commentary within that as well, to a lesser degree, but it was there. But at the same time too, yeah, that was there, but your life wasn't determined by it. There was always bad things in your life, everyone has, no matter where you live. But there's something in this country where the media wants us to be miserable. They want us to be unhappy. Now, I thought about it for a long time. And funny enough, your book made me realise, because the first part of Jim's book is basically happy love letters to us growing up. Basically that. Now, it's not completely all naive, and it's not all like, sugar plums and lollipops, but it's basically a love letter to the past. The second half of the book it takes a very dark turn. And I suddenly remembered how viscerally angry I was when the lockdowns and all that stuff started initially. How I felt like my life was being robbed from me. And so, that was sadism. I know it's a very difficult thing for the average Irish person to understand, but within our establishment and what we call our ruling class, and it goes on the global stage as a whole, there's a sadism from the top going down. And it's a sadism that's delivered with relish. They like hurting us. Now, I can remember, it's almost like, it's almost like the Lord of the Rings. He lived in the Shire in the 1960s, and then Varadkar threw him into Mordor. It was like that. And that's how I felt at the time too. I felt very much. I felt, what country am I living in? I can remember that distinctly. I can remember I was reading about the Committee on Public Safety in France. 2019, and I even made a video about it, how they used public safety in order to commit genocide against Catholics in the south of France. We have to be a safe society, and they just used that as basically a thing to commit genocide. And then I hear this thing in Wuhan, and this story's coming out, this thing, and I could, honest to God, I could feel this cloud descending, this psychic cloud descending. And by January, honest to God, I'd say in February 2020, I was like, have they actually done it? Have they made a bioweapon in some lab somewhere, the Chinese or somebody, NATO, and it's accidentally got out, and it's just like science fiction movies we were raised with. Has it actually happened? That lasted about a day with me, and then I realised that they're lying. They're lying. There is nothing going on. And what did it for me was two things. One, they set up a field hospital at Dublin docks. Why? I don't know. What was that supposed to mean? It was a psychological warfare. It was a psychological terrorism on the population. And to drive that home, they put one of the naval services ships behind it with the big heavy machine guns at the front, just above the so-called field hospital. This whole thing was suddenly looking to me. I've written a book back in the day called The Amble of the Psyche, about how they know how we function. It's almost like they're a different species, but they know how we function. They study us. They don't like this and they don't like that. And that was the first one. I said, this is almost like Monty Python. You have a pandemic and a battleship is involved. I mean, what are you going to shoot? You shoot the germs, this kind of thing. But it was all psychological terrorism. And then the one that really did it for me, and having a kind of a background, I understand the esoteric world and stuff, and it'll always stay with me, was a line of parked trucks in Milan at night, just sitting on the street, and they showed this all over the world. Nobody got into the trucks, nobody got out of the trucks, but they just sat there, and all you had to do was your mind to fill in the blanks. Oh, they're the trucks for all the bodies of the dead people. They're going to have to cart out of Milan. And that was the moment I said to myself, it's a scam. We're being played a game here. There's something going on. I don't know what this is about. Now, like everyone else, I said, what's the real thing for this? Are they trying to reset the banking system? And even part of me thought, I'm very interested in astronomy, and I do know the dangers of these asteroids. Like, how is an asteroid heading towards the Earth? And this is their cover story for it. As absurd that seems now, it's like when you're rationalising and trying to find something, you'll come up with anything. You'll come up with anything. And after a while, it dawned on me, and it's really strong with me now, the reason they literally attacked us. I know that sounds, for people who grew up, and believe me, I worked in some of the biggest banks in Wall Street. I know how the world really works. It's very difficult for people who've grown up calling politicians in this country by their first names, or to see farcical cartoons in the Irish Times, or a man from Fianna Fáil was a bit of a character, and all this kind of thing. That fundamentally the body politic of that thing is a visceral hatred of us. I know that sounds strange to you, but this is why so many of these people, these politicians that were around in the 80s, their children are all now involved in activism, going around calling people far right, because they're full of the same hatreds. They're full of the same class. I'm in the establishment, I'm at the top, I'm looking down on you. In the 80s, you're no good, you'll have to emigrate because this country can't support X amount of people. In the 90s, in today, their children are going, you're far right, you're a Nazi. And the establishment has shifted down a gear and raised the children of attack among the so-called left-wing activists. If you look at them all, they all go straight back to all kinds of the members of the establishment. Not just in politics, but all kinds of things. Media, a lot. Now, 1984, right? There was a character in that called Simon. He was a member of the Outer Party, and Winston Smith he's a very important character in the book because he represents, you know, what Joyce called the unspoken consciousness of the people. He represented the unspoken consciousness of IMSOC. And Winston Smith found him a likeable guy. Otherwise, friendly enough, but he was involved in the latest edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. So he was a zealot about it. And he says, and Winston Smith describes Simon as an otherwise likeable guy, decent person, but he had this propensity for sadism and viciousness that came out whenever the government announced that helicopter gunships had shot up a village or the execution of prisoners. Suddenly he wasn't just, he was a spiritual embodiment of the state rather than a bureaucratic one. And didn't we see that all during the lockdown and the whole pandemic? Didn't we see that? There was people who were not just doing their jobs, but they were drunk on power. There was a sadism there. Now, I can remember Varadkar's particular speech, the one where he actually paraphrased Lord of the Rings, and ironically, and you could tell he was loving it. You could tell there was an element of sadism there. There was an element of like, you know, what, have luck's all down, take away your lives, and we don't know when you're going to get it back. Uncertain. That was pure gaslighting. And then later on towards the Christmas, he said something like, and I'll never forget this one set me off. And I can remember, I think, I did a show with John around that time, and he said something like, well, there's no holidays this year. I know there's kids here. Okay? Who are you to tell me that I can cross the frontiers of my country? Who the hell are you? You know? And then he compounds and he goes, with a smirk on his face. Now, there's a thing called duper's delight, okay? And what happens is when a pathological individual is lying to you, there's a release of a hormone called norepinephrine in the lower brainstem, which is connected to the optic nerves. Now that's why a lot of psychopaths, their eyes, when they're in a predatory mode, their eyes widen. It's an actual animalistic fight or flight things. The other one causes the muscles in the face to trigger on one side, and no one really knows why. So a pathological individual is lying to you to go, you said you fixed the car, did you put in the new van belt? Oh, brand new one. That's called duper's delight. Varadkar does that like he breathes. And another one he does, and women listen, young women especially listen to this because I wrote a book on psychopaths and I know how these guys work. I worked in Goldman Sachs for 4 years. Actually, most people there were very echo at say that. The liar's grimace, this upside down smile. There's literally no photograph of Tony Hohan, Donahue, or Varadkar where they don't have the upside down smile. That's pretending. You cannot, as bad of a liar as you are, and as sadistic as you are, or devious as you are, they cannot transcend their neurochemical functioning. They always give themselves away. I've read numerous books on criminal profiling. That's how I started writing books on psychopaths. I used to work, when I was working on Wall Street, I was reading profiles of Ted Bundy, and Maura Hindley and Ian Brady, and I was going to the senior managers, the same traits were there, except that they weren't violent, but they were sadistic in a different way. And the same gaslight, and I saw all the lockdowns, I saw that, how they would section off a part of the division of a company to punish people in it who weren't playing ball, you know, that kind of thing. This kind of thing would go on. And they waived bonuses in the same way we were waived the pandemic payments, all that kind of thing. But it was a classic case in psychopathy, and they were loving it. They were absolutely loving it. They were like the girl that had been taken to the ball by the princess. That's literally, they were floating around on air. Now, there was lots of devious stuff, and you can sue me because I don't care. There was Tony Holohan had a poster that appeared of him as Superman. It appears out of nowhere overnight, right? And all the papers, and some artist said, oh, I just painted it randomly, and he's coming out of a phone box turning into Superman. And women especially have been asking me for prints. And then I knew right then when they said that this is part of his public reform. Because he had previously been involved in a scandal regarding cervical cancer, and he had a really bad name on women in this country. But the artist was particularly sold, whatever NGO he was working for, you know you were, whoever it was, had told him, specifically mentioned that women want the poster. So the rest of it, who is this guy? So the whole public rehabilitation, neo-beatification of this guy is swung into action. And it's almost like they walked up to him and go, well, we're selling the people a crock of shit. And you're going to be the public face of it. Now, you might look bad eventually, or you might look to go down, but in the meantime, we'll celebrate you as a hero. And if you do this, people will forget all about the cervical cancer thing. This is what goes on in your government. They're not nice people, you know? And so, I don't know what sort of network or all boys network they're in, but that's what they do. That's how they behave. I've seen in Wall Street, this is how it works. You're given a chance, if they're useful. It's the same reason the Greens are in this current dictatorship. We don't have a government, we have a dictatorship run by two main parties. An agreement, whatever, I don't even know what we have. The Greens are in there to allow them to put through policy, this whack job, you know, climate change policy. So if it all blows up in anyone's face, it doesn't blow up in Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael's face. They're like patsies, you know. And when I look at Eamon Ryan now, I see Lee Harvey Oswald for some reason. But that's basically his function. He's the patsy to take it. He's the one in the book depository while George Bush and the rest of them are down in Dealey Plaza. Now, and that's Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael down there. They always use the same modus operandi, and it's weird how it happens. I often wonder, did they actually sit down one day and say, let's think about like doing this? Or is it a kind of an instinctual predatory consciousness that develops inside that makes them like that? And I'm on the fence about it. I don't know which one it is. It could be either one. But back to the book, okay? In the book, Jim talks about the 1960s. And he points out something that I relate to as a music fan. When he talks about the music, the changing music. And he begins with Shauna Reid's Misha Air, which is a symphony of like patriotism. Now, that was actually a huge thing back in the day. Funny enough, I read an article on that not too long ago. And that was a big, that people who were absolutely spellbound by that, Irish people suddenly became wonderfully patriotic. And it was like, oh my God, I love being Irish, it's wonderful. It's magical, you know, we're not a bunch of losers anymore, we have our own country, this kind of thing. And then rock and roll didn't really come to Ireland, really. Pop music did, the Beatle name, that's really what came. You know, we missed out on the first thing. We had show bands which were like the GAA of rock and roll. They really didn't, they were, you know, real rock and roll was other cults. But you know, Dickie Rock, he was like Barney Rock, he was like the GAA singer. And that was a very Irish kind of thing. We weren't quite ready for rock and roll, but we'd have fellas on stage who are living jukeboxes. Same thing, okay, but then it did creep in with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones toured Ireland. And that really did make an enormous cultural impact. If you watch the film Finding Charlie about the Rolling Stones' first tour of Ireland, you really see that. This stuff is here now, it's arrived, it's landed, we've got to deal with it. You know, this is the thing. So then culture in Ireland split off. It's obviously, it seems to be a thing of choices. So you had the Sean O'Reilly thing. That stopped. Pop music took over. And then you had two tangents. You had one side of the society went this way with pop music, and the other side of the society went back to folk music and the folk revival. And you had the Dubliners and all that, you know, Sweeney's Men, all these fantastic, eventually Kleinstein, all fantastic folk bands came out, the remnants of Sean O'Reilly kind of spark. But Ireland followed the pop side. You know what I mean? It was like, Dubliners, brilliant. Great. Sweeney's Men. Kleinstein. I'm going to see Gilbert O'Sullivan tonight, I'm going to see David Essex, I'm going to see... You understand that we chose the cultural side of the outsider because it was bombarding us. British television was bombarding in anyone who had a multi-channel thing. Now, Jim, you mentioned something else as well that's very pivotal. You talk about that in the Plaza Cinema on Parnell Square, at the same time they showed two films. Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it's a mad world, right? Now, I don't know if you've seen either one of those films, but 2001 is a very introspective, deeply spiritual film. I remember my outfit, who didn't even send me to church, he told me something. I remember he told me when he saw that film when he was growing up, he said, that really got me there, but I don't know why. You know, I can't stop thinking about that film, but I don't know what it's about. It was because it touched the archetypal core of people who saw it. But Ireland didn't go down that path. We went down the path of it's a mad world, which is a truly awful film if you've ever seen it. It's loud, it's garish, it's in your face, it's pointless, it's annoying. And that was another choice that Ireland made. We went further into the world of twee, further into the world of superficiality. And it's been like that ever since. And you know, RT is like, and the Irish Times and the rest of them are like a rudder on a ship, right? And whenever a current takes us back to who we're meant to be or what we're meant to be, they whip it over towards like international pop culture. Why? Because they're assassins. They're assassins of what we are. They're assassins of our traditions, of our nation, of our people. They don't like us. Why? Because they hate us. They hate us. They despise us. And they just don't like us at all. It doesn't matter where you come from. If you come from Ballymun, if you come from down in Roscommon, it doesn't matter. They don't like it. They like a certain type who conforms, the outer party, people who grow up, and families who grow up to join the civil service. That's what they like. They like those kinds of worlds. That's the Ireland they like. They look at the civil service. That's why the unions in this country. I never saw a union once in Ballymun. Because the unions to me, when I was growing up, were incredibly middle class. They looked after people in the civil service. They looked after people in the semi-states. And they were all much better off than we were. And had, you know, jobs for life and pensions and all this kind of thing. And when you have someone like David Begg, a guy who said that when the bank's crisis happened in 2008, he wanted troops with machine guns outside banks in case there was a run on the bank. This is a guy who's screaming larking every 5 minutes. He wanted machine gunners outside the banks to shoot any people who wanted their money. This guy was also a head union leader, and he was on the board of the central bank. He is the perfect epitome, specimen of everything they do in this country. You know, you think that, at least in England, they had people like Arthur Scargill who hated the establishment, hated them. You know, he went to war against the Thatchers. Our union leaders on the boards of the central bank, with their arm around the guy they're supposed to be against and fighting for. And when they're on, I used to see them on questions and answers, and you know, have David Begg saying things like, well, the workers this and the workers that, workers this, the workers that. But it was never the workers, it was only the ones who worked in the government. There was no doubt he was talking about like the impact in civil service and CIE and all these other companies. The Irish fellow working at Amplified down the road in the factory, it didn't apply to him, the cost of living raises and stuff like this. So, you know, this official Ireland is a very sinister place. And it creates a situation where people are terrified, and this is what happened with the scandemic, of losing their social status. It's full of signs from 1984, outer party members. Parsons was another character. He was the one when Winston Smith was brought into room 101. He said, my kids reported me to the police. Very proud of them, very proud of them. Thought crime is a terrible thing, the way it sneaks up on you. And then when the company goes, Parsons, room 101, and he points at Winston Smith, take him, don't take me. Well, that's the Irish establishment. We will play alongside. They will do anything to maintain their so-called elitist position, their sense of safety. And God help you, as you know from John, if you step outside that world into the real world, or the real Ireland. And that, to me, the non-official Ireland is actually the real Ireland. That's the real Ireland. Official Ireland is a pastiche of what basically the establishment want. Now, they knew that there was a schism there. I'll just leave this there a second. They knew there was a schism there, and they amplified this during the COVID. They amplified it, okay? So I can remember, like, just, you have, we are the better people because we wear the masks more than anyone else. We social distance, this kind of thing. And you can see how they were splitting society down the middle. A kind of like sanitary sectarianism. And they did something, speaking of religion, they gave the paddies back their religion. They did. They took away the world that the Pope visited in 1979, whatever, well, all that Catholic world of Ireland had gone, but they gave it back to them at the archetypal level, using the rituals surrounding the Mass, the washing of the hands, the processional 3 steps. It was a Corpus Christi parade, this kind of thing. I'm more sainted than you, and this didn't happen in Ireland, it's happened everywhere. I'm more sainted than you because I've washed my hands more than you today. I'm closer to God. I'm wearing 2 masks today because I'm practically Jesus. And this is what it was like. And at the time, you were angry, but you were also laughing at it as well. These masks don't protect you. You went online, you looked at that, and even in their own documents said that doesn't protect you against coronavirus. And yet you had like airplanes flying in from China to Dublin Airport with masks on them. And then I'll never forget the procession of the holy tabernacle of the frozen vaccines touring the country. Remember that? It's now in Clonmel. And it's like, and I was sitting there going, not only where has Ireland gone, but where has reality gone? And that's when I had to get into the car and start talking to the camera, because it was therapy for me. Am I absolutely bonkers here? Am I the only one like this? Then I realized there's millions like us, millions all over the world that were like us. And they were feeling the exact same things that I was feeling. And it became very frightening at times. Like I get emails from people saying, I'm really, Thomas, I live in England. I had a really good job as a security guard in this company. The hours were great, money was great. I have a job now. And I just think, I might as well kill myself. And I was getting these emails all the time. And quite frightening, because then you realise you have a burden on your shoulder that you didn't really want. And this is, again, the sadism. And yet, there'll be all kinds of things like, you're a granny killer. While there was guys out there and women out there who had their business taken from them, who were on the verge of suicide, and no one cared about them. No one gave a shit about them. None of that. And they were alone in the wilderness, and that's why they found people like me, and John, and Mayor Jerry, and people like us, that were actually able to reach them. But that was, I never thought in my life that I would ever live to see a situation where a guy with a nice wife and 2 kids somewhere was telling me he was thinking like taking the hose out of the back of the car, going into the garage and finishing himself off. Where 6 months previous he had been a regular guy working a regular job, loved his family and kids, and now was terrified of the future because he saw no hope. Because Varadkar said, well, you can't go on holiday this year. And I'll never forget this one. And probably never. I will never forget that. Never again. And I'm like, honest to God, if I had found out I shouldn't really say this, but it was like, I don't have a revolutionary bone in my body. I'm more likely to take someone down with satire than I would with anything, but I came close then. I was like, who are you to tell me that I can kind of go somewhere? Now, let's talk about why this happened. Now, I've had this lingering thing in my background of why the world was shut down and why they did it. And I'm now comfortable about saying it in public because I'm hearing other people like Neil Oliver now expressing it. 2016, the plebs in the UK and the USA went off script. They voted in Trump and they voted for Brexit. And everything since then, all the insanity, the flooding of countries with immigrants, you tell me that mass immigration, that mass flotilla that landed in Italy the other day, that wasn't punishment for the Italians voting in the wrong Prime Minister. It's all about, these people are nut jobs, they're sadists, they hate us, and they're putting the boot in. And you say, oh, come on, they're not interested in revenge and things like that. Have you never read the history of the world? Have you never heard, Churchill, the great leader, how he sacrificed 5,000 British seamen because he wanted to order new ships when he was head of the Admiralty, so he sailed them into Turkish guns at Dardanelles. Just business. This is what they're like, and you don't think they got to hate us. You think that they loved people when they got them and made them run into German machine guns in the Somme and in Passchendaele? Do you think that they loved them? They were like, up yours. They were like that. Couldn't give a shit. They don't like us, and the sooner we realise that that's how they feel about us, the happier and more contented we'll be as people. It's like being in a marriage or being in a relationship. Say you're working with a fella, and say you started a business with your friend, okay, you built the business up, and then you're looking at the books, and you're going, there's money missing. No, there's money missing. And you go, Barry, where did this $1,000 a month going out of the account? And he goes, it's probably just getting lost and lose cash or something like that. And then you find that this guy you trusted has bled the company dry and destroyed it. It's like that. It's like that kind of like shock. And it's very difficult for Irish people who have been coached by the media to call politicians by their first names, so we think that they're your friends, to actually say, Leo wouldn't do that, Michal wouldn't do that, Eamon wouldn't do that. I saw a thing, it was some socialist TD, that was some event in West Dublin, and the guy there was on our side, and he was giving her up hard to her, and she was calling her the most repulsive names. And he kept calling her by her first name, and I was like, that's why she's calling you repulsive names. Because I'm not treating you respectfully, because they trained you like pets to call them by their first name, no matter how badly they treat you. And this is appalling. And this is like one thing, and when I die, I want to be known for that I stopped people in this country calling politicians by their first name, because that is a psychological programming that's deliberately been done ever since birth to your hair. Well, it really started with Charlie High. But you can actually forgive Charlie High because he kind of was a gangster, you kind of love, so I can't explain that, but there was something lovable about him, genuinely. I kind of like that about the man. But ever since then, Charlie became all first names. They're all first names now. And people put down their guard. Well, I call him by his first name, but he wouldn't do anything horrible to me. And psychology is a very interesting thing when you start looking at it this way. Now, Despatches, Jim's book, yes, that didn't go away. That world is still there. But they didn't take it from us. We kind of let them have it because we put our guard down. I really do believe that. Now, there's always people who, like John during the family referendum or whatever it was, there's always the one who, the one who shouts the Emperor's new clothes, or that kind of phenomena. But I think now things have changed. I actually have a lot more faith now in the people going forward. Because when I'm going around the country, I get people, and all over, anywhere around the world now, people stop me and say, thanks very much for the vlogs in the car. And, you know, you're absolutely right. Now, that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't done this. And they're getting desperate now. You can actually see the desperateness. You can see, like Russell Brand, I don't like Russell Brand, I just don't like the guy, I never did. And I find his broadcast very, after 5 minutes, but at the same time too, he's been given a little large to the globalists. And there's no doubt about that, he has. I went back and looked and he definitely was. And so now he's getting a warning shot. Well, actually, he's getting the coup de grace, but we're getting the warning shot. The rest of us are getting the warning shot. That like, you'll be next. You'll be next. See what we did? See what we did to Neil Oliver? You'll be next. And you know, I'm sure you know, I'm a great believer in innocent and proven guilty in court. I'm a great believer in that. And you see how the newspapers will have a headline saying, shocking disclosure about Russell Brand and some actress or whatever. And you look at the headline and you think, oh, it's another, he's a dirty bastard. And you read down and she actually says, no, I actually found him okay, he was very polite. And that's why the headline is never the same as the body text. And we were masters of that during COVID. You know, so many dead, bodies piled high in hospitals, even though they're all dancing in hospitals, and choreography movements and all that stuff. The headline, they've made people so dumbed down that they read a headline or something, or they hear the intro line on the evening news, and they think that's the full story. Where if you look at 1960s news broadcasts, or even journalism especially, the newspapers, you get a copy of like the Independent even from 1960s. You're like, what? It's like reading a book. You know, and it's not a government press release rewritten. I look at Fintan O'Toole, and I actually, have I ever met Fintan O'Toole? The question I'd say to him, have you ever had an idea in your head that originated from within your own consciousness? Because you are literally just regurgitating government press releases, in between telling us how wonderful the government are. And the whole left are like that. Now, this is the irony of the day as well. I can remember quite well having relatives in England during the miners' strike there. And there was a very distinct thing between left and right, the Conservatives and everyone else and that kind of thing. Now the left in this country, and the whole world, because of this climate change thing, are actually serving the international banks. That's who they're actually working for. And you cannot get into their heads. I said, do you understand that all these policies that you want rolled out are primarily to make banks richer, and bankers richer, and the globalists have control of your life? Oh, no, it's not like that at all. I'm against the bankers. And yet, you go look at the website, go look at NatWest's policy document and compare it to, you know, its Extinction Rebellion, compare it to Greta Thunberg's book. It's all the same. And you cannot get it into their heads because they're still locked up on labels. I'm left, I'm right, and now it's all like I'm 57 genders. Heinzman. And this kind of nonsense. It's all about taking people's self-reference away from themselves. And that was Simon's thing in 1984. He had no internal self-reference. You know, he didn't realise that. He was constructing a Newspeak dictionary. He was annihilating himself. And Winston Smith even said that, and they'll probably kill him first. Yeah. Why? Because he's too intelligent, and he might wake up one day. And there you go. I imagine if you go to the civil service, the one sitting in a closet who's been given some no-show job is probably the one guy or woman who would actually say, that's a dynamic person. You know, that's a dynamic person. But because he or she was a danger to the ones who were, well, for Ackers and the Young Martins, the mediocre conveyor belt types, they give him a job in the civil service where he sits in a closet stamping something. Because they don't want him, he's too dangerous to be allowed. And this is the thing. This is why we never get any change. And this is why I don't even believe in elections anymore. I'll never vote ever again. I'm pretty sure I won't. Not the way things are now. There's no one to vote for starters, but there's...
But take out your ballot paper.
What's that?
Take out your ballot paper. Do whatever you want. That's what I wouldn't vote either.
No.
But I wouldn't.
There's no meaning or identity to things. Have you noticed that? There's no foundational qualities to anything. The policies of all the parties are all identical. So there's no foundational individuality to each one of those things. It's, it's like the whole thing in Henry Ford. You can have any colour car you want as long as it's black. It's that kind of dynamic, the political system. At the same time too, you see someone like Trump and Brexit, which I find remarkable because it shows that there is a kind of an awakening kind. I'd say a lot of people who voted for Brexit didn't particularly care about the EU one way or another, but it was a chance to stick it to the sort of metropolitans, the people who are going, oh, I'm terribly worried about Britain's isolation if Brexit happens. What they're really saying is, my vineyards in southern France and the tax bills will kill me. That's what they're really saying. And it was the same with Trump. A lot of people in America didn't care about Trump. It was like, yeah, let's get them. And they went, and I would love to be a member of one of those people, those countries that put that ballot in the box and they wake up the next morning and passed. And that's what we're being punished for today. The whole West, especially the English people, but everybody. The human beings showed that we weren't all completely broken in 2016. And ever since that date, they've gone to war with us. But now, what happens when someone's in a war with you? They're out in the open. They're out in the open. And they can't hide behind policy and dogma and orthodoxy and so on. Now, they don't think in terms of nationalism. It's all transnational. It's all the countries with the same policies. We all know this ad infinitum. And that is actually our weapon. I've been telling, I think the greatest tragedy of the Irish people, and I hold my hand up firmly and say I'm just as guilty as anyone else, is we don't speak our own language. Because in Sanskrit there's an expression called vrit, and it literally means language is the maker of reality. That you have control of the language, you have control of the actual perception of reality. The term abracadabra means I create what I speak in Aramaic. We have had our native tongue taken from us. Now, you could sit there saying, oh, the Brits this and the Brits that. That's too easy, because they've been teaching Irish in school for a better part of a century in this country, for 12 years. And most kids come out of school unable to speak it. That could only happen if it was on purpose. If they developed the methodology at some level to make sure we never got our language back. That's one thing, okay? Another thing, I know it sounds corny, I know it sounds goofy, but we have to learn to fall in love with this country. And I mean that literally. I mean, we have to feel about this land, intoxicatingly enamored by it. Everything about it. And unashamedly, not in a vulgar, brash kind of way, but it's like, in an unashamed love of this land and what we are and where we came from. And that should be all countries, because they don't understand that. This is why you have Barack Obama in New York apologising, grovelling before the United Nations for saying, I'm sorry I didn't lock them down harder. Because he doesn't see himself as one of us, but neither do anyone, they just don't. They don't. Now, I'm not going to push the pagan thing. And you mentioned it in the book with De Valera and the Constitution, about Eru. De Valera was a far more insightful, intelligent man than I thought he was when I was growing up. And he knew that there were archetypal power in the concept of the goddess era, to the point where he almost snuck it in, well, he did really. He kind of indirectly snuck it into the Constitution. He wanted the country Era to be named Era and not Ireland. Because he knew there was an archetypal power in that went back to our ancient core. And that would have been from people like Pearce and so on when he was young, and the Gaelic League and the Douglas High. But he knew there was something to that. He was kind of like a magician in that way. So you had God, the Constitution. The original Constitution was unashamedly Catholic. I mean, it was unbelievable. It's like it was practically written by the Vatican, the original draft. And he actually toned it down. And fair play to him, if anything, he was a force of moderation and common sense. He wasn't a radical, really. He was portrayed as a radical. To my generation, we were all told he was a big nut that held us back. You know, fair Maidens dancing at the crossroads, but that was one little snippet from a big speech where he spoke about a lot of common sense. But he knew that. And I think that's a big part of it. You know, and when I see things like the Wolftones concert at the Electric Picnic, and I see them, you know, little things like that show you, and it must frighten them. I could imagine them like all these kind of like think tank policy guys in government buildings, you know, I don't like that, what happened to the Wolftones? The Irish are remembering that they're Irish. Can't have that, you know. The European project, this is what they're floating from. Now, I don't have anything against these people from other countries coming. That's their own lives. If they're hard-working, decent people, good. But this is what they're up to. It's not the immigrants' fault. It's the globalists who are doing this. They're trying to dilute every national culture. They've done it in the north of England amazingly well. You know, there's whole areas of the north of England and France that are essentially under Sharia law. And they want that here. Now, the British were always told, well, you had an empire, you did terrible things around the world, so you owe it to them. But they've actually tried to use that on us, when we never had an empire, you know. And I've even seen ridiculous arguments go, well, we rode on the backs of the American and British Empire. We piggybacked on without taking the blame. And it's like, are you any awareness of the famine and stuff like that? And I see a lot of stuff on the internet now, on the famine. For some reason, the internet is full of documentaries and films on the famine, and they're not made by Irish people. They're made by British and American people. And they're like, I can't believe what was done to Ireland. And the comments are filled with Irish people going, you know, they never really spoke about it this way to us when we were growing up. It was like, yeah, the Brits were here, the sports went bad, and the next thing we were living in America. That's literally how we're talking about famine. That's literally how they feel the famine. That's how I remember it to go. But all the social policies like rebellion and all these other things, and the fact that many Irish landlords who were part of the same ruling class, who were in power of the ruling class today, were behind it. We were never told that. Why? Because the ones writing the educational books were the same ones whose family had the land, down in Kerry and Cork and everywhere else. And I find that amazing. And we don't understand who we really are. I remember when I first worked in Wall Street, I got a job, I think it was Jacob Morgan. And I got my cubicle, and they give you a little sign, you know, and it was Thomas Patrick Sheridan. And there was this guy who used to work with a Jewish guy called Lenny Horowitz, or Chaim Horowitz, a lovely, great guy, lovely guy. And he walked up to me, he looks at my thing, he goes, first thing, Thomas Patrick Sheridan. He goes, I pay money to have any one of those three names. And I said, what do you mean? He said, try going through life as Chaim Horowitz. He goes, and I said, well, you know, it's not the same. He says, there's something about Irish people that kind of own America quietly, and you're accepted everywhere. And I never thought about that. And he said to me, if America is something, it's Irish. That's what he said to me. It's really, you know, you Irish don't really know how much you kind of own America. You know, look at St. Patrick's, but not just St. Patrick's Day. You know, look at all the people in this bank who have big shots, so many of Irish names and stuff like that, which is true. And I never thought about us that way. That there was a kind of a cachet, you know, in my name, in my actual full name, Thomas Patrick Sheridan. There was a kind of a social gravitas in that in certain societies. And again, I remember thinking about that, I never thought about that. And then I remember one time I went to see the Chieftains at Lincoln Center, and which is in a very posh part of Manhattan. It's upper west side. It's like, you know, moving on up to the east side. That kind of big money. I always say the part of upper New York where they didn't shoot John Lennon. But there was playing in Lincoln Center, you know, classical music, very posh and all this stuff. And there was all these people there, and there was all these Jewish guys with green yarmulkes, coming up to see the Chieftains. And I was thinking to myself, this is just wonderful. How come we're never told about this in Ireland? How come we're never told how people around the world appreciate our culture this way until Riverdance happened? Now, you talk a lot about music. I'm going to talk about music that affected me emotionally, psychologically, and culturally, and spiritually. When I was living in America, I was coming back and forth to visit my family. And I can remember for some reason, In the years I came back quite a bit from my brother's wedding and stuff, Enya the sound of Enya was everywhere. And I'd come back to Ireland, I used to play Enya, I don't know if you heard me to America those years, but I used to play Enya as the plane was landing. They'd play like Orinoco Flow or something like that. And then and every TV ad in Ireland had Enya style music. It wasn't Enya, it sounded like Enya, you know? And this would be the early 90s, right? And I can actually remember being in a spiritual state listening to her music while I was here. I know that sounds really weird, but I was actually in a spiritual state. Like you know, I went to a Tibetan camp. I went to a monastery in Tibet, and the monks were chanting, and I went, well, this is amazing. And then recently, I started listening to Enya again, and my God, it all came back. Those emotions, those feelings. It was so beautiful, and it was also from a time just before the globalist guys, just before Maastricht, just before the end of the punk, just before all the other stuff the globalists foisted upon us. Enya's music was almost like the children of Lear, the swans dying. And you know, at the end of their 900-year exile, it was like they had died and gone into the world of shadow or something like that. And I was this woman has an unbelievable power in her music, even though she uses technology and synthesizers and all this stuff. But my God, only an Irish person could make a synthesizer sound like that. We're not Germans, we're not Kraftwerk, you know, not like me and my, that kind of thing, you know. Song number one, it was like only an Irish person could take a synthesizer and a 48-track studio and produce something that sounds so spiritual. And it was I'm a great believer in destiny, and I believe things happen for a reason. I believe things happen. I believe that happened to me for a reason, because that's what called me back to Ireland. I had a good life in America, probably too good, and a lot of money, and I was doing it very well. I had lots of friends, great social life, and this little damp island on the west of Europe was pulling me back. I just can't explain it. I just cannot explain it. And I mean, New York, fantastic. I was in Atlanta and other places. Yeah, fabulous. I still love going there. But there was just something, that plane coming in over Dublin Bay. When you see the Hill of Hope, and Enya starts playing, and it's not a joke. It's absolutely real. It's absolutely real. Now, where is that feeling in our culture? It's gone. It's been gone a long time. Now, when the state was first founded, they used to have the Talpi Games in Croke Park. I don't know if you know about this, but when the state was first founded, Croke Park used to have this incredible cultural event, which is supposed to really ignite the Talpi Games of ancient Bronze Age Ireland. And they'd have fellas walking out and dressed like Cullen with, Irish wolfhounds, and then they have sports and debates and poetry competitions. And you look at the money and the early stamps of the country era, this beautiful artwork. There was a fantastic exhibition in the National Museum Annex at Collins Art about 10 years ago of the international competition they had to design the money for Ireland. And they had like coins that were designed by famous Czech artists and everything, but in the end they just stuck with something. This is what we are. This is what money should show. And yet, as simple as the money was, it was probably the most beautiful money ever produced by any nation. And our stamps, and our typography. You didn't have post office or PT or on post. You had Othicon fished in the same lettering style that went right back to the early Iron Age. What came straight after Owen. And this river, the river, had flowed, and in the 1990s it went underground. It went underground. And Enya is like the last, for me it was like the last, it's pop music, she sold 100 million pounds, but there's just something about that. And you can go around, to take it from me, ask somebody who the biggest star in the world is. The biggest star in the world is Enya. I'm not kidding. You can go to Asia, you can go to Africa, you can go anywhere in America, and everybody has Enya records. You think Bob Marley, or you think U2, or you think the Stones or someone else in, yeah. And what she's playing Irish spiritual music. She's writing Irish spiritual music. I'll never forget this. I was in Selma, Mississippi, of all places, late 90s. And I went out to see this blues festival with a friend of mine. And there was all these guys there, great, you know, my woman left me, and all that kind of stuff, right? And they all were playing, and we were sitting around having a laugh, and just chilling. And so in the background, I hear behind me, the theme song from the Celts. And the woman who was cleaning up the pizzeria put on the Enya CD in Selma, Mississippi. And here was I going to find an authentic blues version in Delta blues in the deep south of America. And I couldn't get away from Enya. You could, she's everywhere. I saw her all over Sri Lanka, everywhere. And what does that tell you? That tells you the contrast between what works for us and what doesn't. You have Ryan Tuberty trying to have us believe that he's going to take over the job of the traffic guy at Milton Keynes FM, as he's some kind of big shot on some weird PR tour. But Enya only has to be Irish, and that's enough. We only have to be ourselves, and that's enough. We saw that with Riverdance. We saw that with Enya. You see that with James' book. We only have to be ourselves. We don't have to put up flags and banners, although you saw me put up flags today. We don't have to put up flags and banners. We don't have to march down, give me my rights, you bastards, and all this stuff. We don't have to do any of that. But by being ourselves is the worst torture we can inflict upon them, because they don't want us being Irish anymore. And when I think, and that's why I made a video today called The Case for Era, that, honestly, I know it pisses off a lot of people, but I don't care about the Northern Ireland thing. I don't care. I have loads of friends up from unionist backgrounds in the North, and guess what's happening up there? They're all calling themselves Irish now. The further we get away from the Troubles, they're more comfortable about calling themselves Irish. This is not happening by accident. And I have loads of friends up there who are into the ancient Irish sites and all the stuff down here. And many of them, some of them, their parents were actually in the Orange Order. You know? And here they are calling themselves Irish, and some got Irish passports because of Brexit. And we did that in one generation, because politics does not serve us well in this country. Being ourselves serves ourselves best in this country. And that's what Jim's book was about. Jim is just himself. When he was growing up, he got into the pop music at the time. Why? Because it was great, you know. When Ireland changed, he got into other things. He kept his Christian faith. I mean, when I say Christian, you know, small c, not that, you know. I could understand that Christianity was very much Jesus focused rather than any kind of dogma focused. I like to use the word spiritual with a small s and all the other letters in capitals. You know, so therefore there's no orthodoxy connected. But that's what that book was about. That's about instead of saying put it into the memory hole, I would say you put it into the safety deposit box, and now we've found the key. So thanks very much, everybody.